Okay, welcome everybody to our quick chazara of the simanim for Sefer Melachim Aleph. And in this Sefer, all of our images are going to be taking place in the pantry, and this will hopefully help you a little bit remember which simanim are from which Sefer. So in the pantry, you'll know that the siman is for Melachim Aleph. Okay, a lot of these prakim have quite a bit happening, so we'll try to connect it as best as we can to the siman. Okay, Parak Aleph, our siman is an olive tree, olive for an olive tree. And the parak starts with David HaMelech, who was getting old and feeling very cold, and he had Avishag Hashunamis, a young Basula, a young girl, come to keep him warm. And the olive tree in our picture represents David HaMelech. If you recall from Shmuel Beis, they are also the olive tree represented David HaMelech. So here, David HaMelech, the olive tree, is getting very cold. And additionally, olive oil is used to anoint the new king. And we actually have two new kings in our parak, not literally, because one of them is not legitimate. That's Adoniyahu. He was David HaMelech's son, and he tried to become the king in this parak. Ultimately, Shlomo HaMelech became anointed to be the new king. And in this image, we see the man taking a bottle of oil from the pantry shelf, and he's pouring it over the head of Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo spares Adoniyahu's life, but only on condition that Adoniyahu remains loyal to him. We'll see later, Prakim, that Adoniyahu did not remain loyal. Okay, Perek Beis. Our siman is a bias. And here we have Shlomo HaMelech sitting in his brand new throne inside this small little house in the pantry. And he's kicking out of his house multiple people who had done wrong to David. This was upon David's request. When David was dying, he asked Shlomo HaMelech to take care of these people. So number one, Adoniyahu rebelled and he wanted to marry Avishag. And Shlomo HaMelech realized this was only because Adoniyahu wanted to get some legitimacy as king. So Shlomo HaMelech had him killed. Okay, now we have the ones that David HaMelech asked him to do. Yoav was afraid. So Yoav ran to the Mizbeach and he held on to it, thinking that he wouldn't be killed there. But Shlomo HaMelech had him killed anyway. And Shimi ben Gera, if you recall from Shmuel Beis, Shimi ben Gera cursed out David HaMelech. So Shlomo HaMelech tells Shimi ben Gera, do not leave Yerushalayim. If you leave Yerushalayim, you're going to be killed. It worked for the beginning, but after 3 years, Shimi ben Gera went to go search for some of his avadim. Shlomo HaMelech heard about it and had him killed. Okay, a quick little siman for the three people who Shlomo HaMelech killed in this parak is Ish, Aleph, Yod, Shin, Adoniyahu, Yoav, and Shimi. Okay, parak 3, parak Gimel, our siman is a Gamal. And in this parak, we'll learn a little bit about Shlomo HaMelech's great wisdom. Now, many people who tour the pyramids in Egypt ride camels. It's a convenient way that they go riding there. And that can remind you that in the parak about the Gamal, the camel, Shlomo HaMelech actually marries Bas Parai. Okay, and also in Egypt, it's mostly a hot desert, nothing really grows, so the camel was very hungry and went to the pantry to get a snack. Okay, so again, Shlomo HaMelech marries the daughter of Parai. And then, and here's what the image shows, Hashem offers Shlomo to choose a request. Shlomo HaMelech chooses wisdom. Hashem was very happy with that request, so Hashem gives him wealth, success, and a long life as well. And the parak tells us, a little bit of a demonstration of Shlomo HaMelech's wisdom with the famous story of the two mothers. Each one had a baby. One baby died. One baby survived. And both mothers claimed that their baby was the one that survived. Shlomo HaMelech said, okay, let's cut the baby in half. The real mother says, don't. And that's what Shlomo HaMelech was able to say, you see, this mother is the real mother. Okay, famous story. Parak 4, Dalit, our siman is a Deles. And this door inside the pantry leads to Shlomo HaMelech's kingdom of prosperity. You see all this stuff growing. Of course, you fill your pantry with great things that grow. Things were going really well for the Jewish people. Shlomo HaMelech had many officers who are listed, in this parak by name. We get to see a little bit about who they are. They helped him run the kingdom. So in our image, we have this magical door of the pantry that leads to the prosperity. Okay. Parak 5, our siman parak Hey is Hey. At the beginning of parak Hey, a little bit talks more about how smart Shlomo HaMelech was and how he was smarter than Avram, Moshe Rabbeinu, Yosef, and even the Dara Midbar. He was really, really brilliant, smartest person that ever lived. And in our siman here, it picks up from the next part. Okay, well, our siman really starts in the middle of the parak. After talking about how smart Shlomo HaMelech was, then Shlomo HaMelech gets ready to start building the Beis HaMikdash. Here we have Shlomo HaMelech using Hey, parak Hey, to build the Beis HaMikdash. Of course, Shlomo HaMelech really prepared strong materials like special wood, and he divided the people into different shifts, and he got this sword from Hiram, the king of Sor. The next few prakim are all going to be about the Beis HaMikdash. Parak 6, Parak Vav, our siman is a sword. The Beis HaMikdash is actually built to this parak. It's discussed in detail. Now, if you ever watch a construction worker build up layers of bricks, they have the bricks, and they spray the cement, and they spread the cement with some kind of scraper to smooth it out. So our simon is the Beis Hamikdash. Shlomo Melech, we use the sword as a scraper, not an actual scraper. They use this very fancy sword to be the scraper of the Beis Hamikdash. Perek 7, Perek Zion, our simon is Kli Zion, a gun. But this gun, instead of shooting out copper bullets, it's shooting out copper kalim, copper vessels, and also Yachan and Bayaz, gigantic pillars for the Beis Hamikdash. And the gun also started shooting out Shlomo HaMelech's palace. That is some crazy gun filling up the pantry with all of these things. Okay. Perek Ches, Perek 8, our simon is a challah. And in our Perek, the Arain is finally brought to the Beis Hamikdash. And there's a long 14-day celebration. And Shlomo HaMelech is handing out a lot of challahs to all the people, giving them good food, lots of goodies from the pantry and challah. And then Shlomo HaMelech goes and gives a bracha to the people, and he davens. And you see here in the image, Shlomo HaMelech's davening. And the Beis Hamikdash should always be a place where people come and daven and have their tefillos answered. Okay, Perek Tes, Perek 9, our simon is Tipa, Tes or Tipa. And I wouldn't be interested in having a hot tea party in the pantry, but it's there. And Hashem is pouring the hot tea, burning, sizzling tea, as a warning to Shlomo HaMelech. And he says, if you keep the Torah and your descendants keep the Torah and everything is good, then you and your descendants will have a dynasty of kings. But if you stray from the Torah, you will be sent into Golos. You don't want to get burned by the really hot tea, so you better be careful. Perek Yud, our simon is a minion of Yidden. And we return back to the topic of Shlomo HaMelech's wisdom. There was the queen of Sheba, or the pasuk says the queen of Shiva. And she comes with loads of gifts for Shlomo. And she was very impressed by his wisdom. She didn't believe the rumors that she was hearing. She came to see it for herself. And this simon, Perek Yud, the minion of Yidden, and the queen of Shiva talks to the minion and is impressed by them. Of course, really, she spoke to Shlomo HaMelech, but we're making it seem that she spoke to the minion of Yidden. And perhaps a little hint to remember her name, and that it's with the minion of Yidden. Her name is Shiva, which is 7. And, when you're trying to get a minion, you're standing out, come in for a minion, we only have 7 people. So the queen of Shiva is talking to the minion of Yidden. Okay, Perek 11, Perek Aleph, 11 of the stars in Yosef's dream. Our simon is stars. And not such good things happen here. Shlomo HaMelech begins to stray a little bit. Shlomo HaMelech marries many wives, but they showed him their gleaming stars, meaning they showed him different shiny things. They led him astray to follow in their footsteps. And Hashem, things like that. And Hashem got angry at Shlomo and told him, because of your behavior, the kingdom will be split from your son. Okay, now we're introduced to Yeravam ben Nevat. He will later become the king of one of the halves of the kingdom. And he was walking in a garden somewhere in the north, and the Navi, Achia Hashiloni, we'll learn more about him soon, came over and ripped Yeravam's clothing into 12 pieces, or in our case, ripped it into 12 stars, and he gave Yeravam 10, and he told him, you'll be king over 10 of the Shvatim. Shlomo's son, Shlomo HaMelech's descendants, would still be king over Shevet Yehuda, and maybe Shevet Yamin as well. Perhaps you could think of the Star of David, to remind you that was the only star that David HaMelech was left with. Only one Shevet, maybe one, maybe 2 Shvatim. Okay, at the end of our Perek, just further the metaphor here, Shlomo HaMelech actually sees stars, a euphemism for dying, meaning Shlomo HaMelech dies at the end of this Perek. Okay, moving along to Perek Yud, we now have Rechavam. Rechavam was Shlomo HaMelech's son. He becomes king. And he gets advice from the old people, advice from the young people, the foolish young people, and he chooses to follow the foolish young people who said to raise the taxes. That angered the Aseres HaShvatim, and they chose to leave. You see in our image, they're marching out the door. Our simon of Yud Beis is Yud Beis Shvatim, so it works out pretty well. And perhaps we can imagine a Rechavam being very fat in the pantry, because the word Rachav means wide, and large, fatter people are very often wide. And he had to raise the taxes because he was eating all the food in the pantry, and he had to replenish the food, so we needed money for that. Okay, anyway, so we have the 12 Shvatim, our Sefer Perek Yud Beis, and we're separating the 10 from the 2. 12 is 10 and 2. We're separating the 10 and the 2. The 10 Shvatim storm out, and they go and follow Yeravam, we mentioned in the previous Perek. Our hint for him is, you're a bum. You are a bum. You're a bum. Why? Because Yeravam did not behave so well. He's from the famous Chayte of Machtes. He was not a very good person. But they're following him. The 10 Shvatim are following Yeravam ben Nevat. Yeravam ben Nevat is afraid that if the Aseres Shvatim go to Yerushalayim, to El Regel, they'll see Rechavam sitting in the Beis Hamikdash, and they'll begin to follow him. So instead, he blocks people from going to the El Regel, and he sets up 2 golden calves one in Beis El and one in Dun. So people should go to those Avodah Zaras instead of going to the Beis Hamikdash. So you can imagine Yerav and Nevat locks up this door of the pantry so nobody else could come back in. We now move on to Perek Yud Gimel, and our simon is a bar mitzvah boy. In this Perek, a Navi, whose name was Ido, although the pasuk doesn't actually tell us his name, he comes to Yeravam. Yeravam was doing Avodah Zarah on a Mizbeach. And he tells Yerabam, and that one day a descendant of David will kill all Avodah Zarah priests on the Mizbeach. And as a sign that what I'm saying is true, the Mizbeach should burst open. It'd be like a piñata, because the bar mitzvah really is a birthday party. So burst open like a piñata, and that is exactly what happens. Yerabam sticks out his hand to try to tell the guards to seize Ido Hanavi, but his arm gets frozen, stretched out and frozen. Eventually, Ido, the Navi, davens that Yeravam's hands should be released, and Yeravam invites the Navi to come meet with him at their bar mitzvah suda. But Hashem told Ido not to eat with Yeravam, so Ido didn't. But then, as Ido was leaving, a Navi Sheker comes and tells Ido, come, you can eat with me. Hashem told me you could eat with me. Ido listens, and Hashem tells Ido that because you ate, you didn't listen, this Navi was Navi Sheker, you'll die and you won't be buried. And that's what happened. Ido Navi dies, and a lion eats him. In Perek Yud Daled, we have Yad, our simon is for a juggler. Okay, now perhaps, as a joke, we could say, one of the reasons why Yerabam was so bad was because instead of learning in yeshiva, he was busy practicing to be a juggler. No, I don't really mean it seriously. But anyway, in our simon, Yeravam is a juggler, and he's putting on a juggling show for a Navi. This Navi has a big key on his shirt, and he's reading from the Shiloh Siddur, a very famous Siddur. He goes, this is Achia Hashiloni, the Navi we mentioned earlier, Achia Hashiloni. Anyway, see, Yeravam's son was sick. So he sends his wife. He knew that Achia Hashiloni didn't like him because he did a lot of Avodah Zarah. So he wants to find out if his son's going to live. So he tells his wife to dress up and go and meet Achia Hashiloni. Now, Achia Hashiloni was blind. You see in our image, he has something wrapped around his eyes. He was blind. But Hashem told him that Yeravam's wife was coming. So Yeravam's wife comes, and Achia Hashiloni tells her, come in, Eishes Yeravam, wife of Yeravam, come. You should know your son is going to die, and all of Yeravam's descendants are going to die, and they won't be buried. Okay, later in the same Perek, Yeravam also dies, and Yeravam's son, Nadav, takes over. We also have a little bit of discussion at the south, the kingdom of Yerushalayim, of Rechavam, and there's a big robbery there. All of Shlomo Melech's treasures and the treasures of the Beis Hamikdash are stolen, and Rechavam dies, and we're left with Aviyam taking over. So now we have Nadav, king of the north, and Aviyam, king of the south. Okay, Perek 15, 2 Perek Tezvav, our simon is 2 B'Shvat, 2 a fruit platter. Now things get a little tricky because the Prakim are telling us stories of both kings of Yehuda and of the kings of Yisrael. And we need to keep track of what's in the north and what's going on in the south. We'll start with the Yehuda side. So Aviyam was the son of Rechavam. He was the king, and he wasn't a tzaddik. He didn't follow the ways of David HaMelech. But after he dies, his son Asa became the king. For us, we use a simon, a saw. And that's why the king in this picture is holding a saw. And that's where our simon has it, where he was getting rid of all Avodah Zaras. He was a good king. He was a tzaddik. And he's cutting up the fruits because it's simon for Perek Tezvav, 2. And he's also cutting up Avodah Zaras. Okay, meanwhile, on the Israel side, we mentioned Yeravam's son, Nadav, who was also a very big Rasha. He was the king for 2 years, but only 2 years, because then a man named Basha rebelled against Nadav, killed all of Yeravam's descendants, like Achia Hashiloni said in Perek Yud what happened, and he took over the throne. He was a Rasha as well. Now, it's worthwhile just to point out that unlike in Yehuda, which had a dynasty of David HaMelech, Shlomo HaMelech, Rechavam, Aviyam, all the way down, on the Yisrael side, we had a few small dynasties where, let's say Yeravam, Nadav, but very often the family of a couple generations, then it's going to switch over to somebody new. Like here, where Basha comes in, from nowhere. Okay, now you move on to Perek Tes Zayin. We will use a acrobat as our simon. This Perek only discusses the north, the kingdom of Yisrael, and quite a lot happens here. So Basha was the king, and Hashem tells a Navi named Yehu that Basha and his family will be wiped out. And that's what happens later in this Perek. But first, Basha dies, and his son, Elah, takes over. Okay, but this is going to be very short-lived, because one of Elah's slaves, named Zimri, kills King Elah and takes over the rulership. He also wipes out Basha's entire family, which is what the Navi Yehu said would happen. However, Zimri was only a king for 7 days, because even though he was the one who wiped out Elah and Basha's family, and he made himself king, but the Klal Yisrael, the Jews didn't want him. They appointed someone named Omri instead. Omri goes and burns down the palace with Zimri inside. So here you have in our image Zimri on fire, being burnt, and you have the little music symbol on his shirt because Zemer means a song. Maybe you could think that while Zimri is being burned, he's actually singing. Okay. It happens to be this one little pasuk that tells us that even after Zimri was killed, half the people started following a man named Tivni ben Ginas, but eventually everyone begins following Omri, and we do have a little bit of a dynasty here. Okay, so Omri bought a land in the north of Eretz Yisrael from a man named Shemer, and he named this land Shomron. And from in the later Prakim, the northern kingdom is very often referred to as Shomron because that was their capital city. Now, Omri was a Russia, and when he died, his son, quite an infamous son, Achav, took over. Achav married a Goyish woman. Maybe she converted, maybe not. Her name was Izevel. We'll see a lot about Izevel in the coming Prakim. Now, finally, I know it's a lot here. Finally, the parak ends off with a man named Chiel. Chiel attempted to rebuild the city of Yerichai. Now, Yeshua had cursed anybody who tries to rebuild the city, and Yeshua said that you'll start with the death of your oldest son, and when you finish the city, your youngest son will die, and that's exactly what happened with Chiel. Okay, now you move on to parak Yud Zayin. Yud Zayin, our siman, is a used car. Very famous person we meet in this parak, Eliyahu HaNavi. You see Yahu on the shirt of the Navi in the siman. Eliyahu HaNavi. And Eliyahu HaNavi tells Achav there's going to be a drought, and it's not going to rain unless I say so. Of course, when there's a drought, that means there's going to be a hunger, nothing's growing. So Hashem tells Eliyahu, go hide in an area called Nachal Chris, and you'll drink the water from over there, and the ravens will bring you food. You see here in our picture, there are ravens with bread in their mouths or food in their mouths landing on the decrepit used car. But eventually, because it was a drought, the river dries up. So Hashem tells Eliyahu HaNavi, go to Tsarfas, and there will be an almana who will give you food. So he goes there, but the almana says she only has a small amount of food. Eliyahu tells her, don't worry, let's share the food, and Hashem will replenish your stock. And it happened, and her food didn't run out. Later, this woman, her son gets sick and dies, and Eliyahu brings the son back to life, like you see in our image. The siman, you have the used car, and you see the woman pouring the ingredients next to it, and the child who just came back to life, the sleeping boy who came back to life by Eliyahu HaNavi. Parak Yudches, Parak 18, our siman is a chuppah. And in this parak, a very, very famous story, Eliyahu on Har Carmel takes place. But before we get to that, the parak starts off with Izevel tried to kill out all the Nevi'im. Ovadia, he was a servant of Achav, was a big tzaddik, and he hid 100 Nevi'im, 50 in one cave, 50 in another cave, and he supported them. Okay, that's a sidebar. Now, meanwhile, Achav sends Ovadia, go look for water, we need water. While Ovadia is looking, he bumps into Eliyahu HaNavi. Eliyahu HaNavi tells him, go tell Achav that I'm here. I want to see him. Achav comes, and they make the famous arrangement of the Har Carmel test to prove to everybody once and for all that Hashem is a true master of the world, not the Avodah Zarah Baal that Izevel followed. And this is where our siman picks up. But you see under the chuppah, Yud Ches for chuppah, because Ben Shmonas for the chuppah, get married when you're 18. Letter Ches looks like a chuppah. Under the chuppah, they have the story of Har Carmel. So what was the story very quickly? There were 450 priests of the Baal. Eliyahu was the Navi Hashem against them. Eliyahu brought 2 bulls, told the Navi Baal to pick one of them, and that each one of us will put the bull on the Mizbeach without a fire, and I'll cry out to Hashem, you'll cry out to the Baal, and we'll see where the fire comes from. They do this, the priests are crying from morning till afternoon, and nothing happens. Eliyahu Navi mocks them, hey, call out louder, maybe the Baal is sleeping and you can wake him up. Anyway, doesn't work. So Eliyahu then calls over all the people and says, gather around. He takes 12 stones representing the Shvatim, he makes a Mizbeach, and he has the people pour water on the Mizbeach just to add to the nace. The fire is going to burn the animal even with all the water. And the fire comes down like you see in the image, and he burns up the carbon and all the wood. Eliyahu announces that people should grab these Nevi'ah Baal who were just proven to be liars and kill them. Eliyahu then tells Achav, go, eat and drink, because soon it will be rain. All right, Parak Yud Tes, our siman is a yacht. Eliyahu Navi is riding on the yacht. We'll get to that in a second. When Izevel heard what happened, she wanted to kill Eliyahu, because Eliyahu just had 450 Nevi'ah Baal killed. So Eliyahu ran away. And at one point, he was sleeping, and a malach came and brought him food, and that food sustained him for 40 more days. And here our Hashem picks up, because at one point, Hashem tells Eliyahu, go stand by the mountain, and Hashem will give you some kind of revelation, a certain type of revealing himself to you. And first, there was a big wind, a big tornado, like you see in the image. And then there was an earthquake, like you see in the image on the bottom. And then there was fire coming in, and finally silence. Hashem comes in silence. The silence signifies that Hashem has arrived. And this is all what you see in this image. Now, one more thing. In this end of the parak, Eliyahu makes 3 appointments, 3 anointings he does. Number 1, he anoints a man named Yehu. Not to say Yehu yet before, but this Yehu will later become the king over Yisrael. He also appointed Chazael, who was a guy, to be the king over Aram. And finally, because every yacht needs a captain and a second in command, Hashem told Eliyahu to go and anoint Elisha Hanavi to become his student, and later Elisha will become his successor. We'll learn about that in Melachim Beis. Okay, moving on to Perkaf. Our simon is a cafe, and there is a very big deal, a deal being made over cups of coffee in the cafe between Ben Hadad, the king in the hoodie, Ben Hadad, and Achav. Because Ben Hadad, the king of Aram, surrounded Shomron with his soldiers. And Achav said, just take whatever you want, take all the money and everything we have. But then Ben Hadad asks for more. I want more treasures. Rashi explains the treasure Ben Hadad asked for was a Sifrei Torah, and Achav didn't want to give him that. He later got rewarded, Chazal tell us, for showing the covet to the Sifrei Torah. But anyway, Achav said, I'm not giving you the Sifrei Torah. He sent word to all the Zakanim, and they told him, refuse Ben Hadad's demand. Do not give it to him. So Achav told Ben Hadad's messengers that we're not doing it. Meanwhile, a Navi comes and tells Achav that you'll win against Ben Hadad. And Chazal tell us this Navi's name was Michahu. More about him coming up. So Achav goes out with the young soldiers, and they win against Ben Hadad. But Ben Hadad's servants then suggest that Ben Hadad, we were attacking from the mountainous areas. Maybe the Jewish Hashem only has power in the mountains. Next time we'll attack from the ground, and we'll be able to win. So they get ready to do that. The Navi Micho comes back and tells Achav that because of what Ben Hadad said, you'll be victorious again against Ben Hadad. And that's what happened. The people of Aram, they begged for mercy. And they actually dressed up and pretended to be hurt. I'm sorry, I skipped the line. The people of Aram begged for mercy, and Achav actually speared them. They gave them back their land. Okay, now the Navi Micho comes back to Achav, and he dresses up, so nobody could tell that his name was Micho, that it was Micho. And he tells Achav that I was instructed to watch a man, and I was told if I don't watch this person carefully, I'll be killed, or I'll be forced to take your cassette. And I failed my mission. The man is gone. I didn't do the job correctly. So Achav tells him, you either have to pay the kikar zav, the kikar kesef, or you'll be killed. Micho then removes his outer guard and look who I am. I'm Micho. King realized who he was, and the Navi Micho tells Achav, because you sent away Ben Hadad of the enemies, you spear them, you'll be killed instead. Okay, moving on to Perek Chaf Aleph. Our simon is a car. The king Achav is driving up in his fancy car. This is a very famous story, and he sees a man named Navos in a vineyard, and he wants to buy the vineyard. Navos refuses to sell it. It was his ancestral property. He doesn't want to sell it. So Izebel, Achav's wife, sees that Achav is very upset by this. So she comes up with a scheme. She hires the 2 false witnesses we see in the image here to say that Navos cursed Hashem and that Navos cursed the king. And Navos gets killed, and Achav is able to take the vineyard. Hashem is very unhappy with this. Hashem sends Eliyahu Navi to go tell Achav that because you killed Navos and you took his vineyard, dogs will lick up your blood, and your entire family will be wiped out, just like I did to Yerovam's family, just like I did to Baasha's family. When Achav heard this, he ripped his clothing and did some level of tshuva. So Hashem told Eliyahu that go tell Achav, since you did this level of tshuva, the punishment won't come during your lifetime, it'll come during your son's lifetime. Perek Chaf Beis, our final perek for the Sefer, is the cab. Our simon for Chaf Beis is a cab. King of Yisrael is Achav again. The king of Yehuda at this time was Yehoshaphat, the son of Asa. Just like Asa was a big tzaddik, we learned in Perek Tesvav, Yehoshaphat was also a big tzaddik. Now Achav wants to go and attack Aram, so he joins up with King Yehoshaphat. And they want to ask Hashem if they'll succeed in the fight against the Aram. So Achav asks 40 Nevi Abal, and they'll tell him, don't worry, you'll succeed. Yehoshaphat is wary. He wants to ask a Navi Hashem. So Achav says, I know one Navi Hashem, Micho, but he always says bad things about me. He always says negative about me. But anyway, Achav and Yehoshaphat are sitting there, and one Navi Hasheker named Sityo ben Kenana, he comes with horns made of iron, and he says, as a symbolic message, with these horns you'll bore Aram. And all the other Navi Hashekers are there, and they're saying, yeah, you're going to win. But Micho said a different message. Yes, you'll be Matzliach, but you, Achav, will die in the war. Tzedkiyahu ben Kenana, the Navi Hasheker, hears this, and he slaps Micho across the face. But Micho just says, you'll see what'll happen. You'll see that I'm right, and you're lying. Achav, meanwhile, has Michal locked up and says, feed him only bread and water until I return. Meanwhile, the kings Achav and Yehoshaphat go. Now, Achav disguised himself so they wouldn't be able to tell that he was the king. But an Aram archer happens to shoot an arrow, and it lands in Achav and kills him. And in our image, you see this, right? King Achav is riding in the cab, representing his horse, and he's clutching at his wound because he was hit by an arrow. Okay, now just a little bit of foreshadow here. Achav's son, Achazia, became the king. He was a Rasha, went in the ways of Yeravam, and we'll start with Achazia right in the beginning of Melachim phase. Okay, hope this is great. Thank you all for listening. Take care.